Andrea, in November 2006, you had a near-death experience during heart surgery. Would you tell us about this? A few years previous to an appointment for cardiac examination, I had been diagnosed with cardiac arrhythmia. My doctor, an anthroposophical doctor, was determined to carry through the whole exam in the hospital where his medical practice was located and where he wanted to do a few more examinations. The night before this appointment, I was sitting at my kitchen table, and I couldn't explain why I was so frightened. But finally, I got control of myself and went the next day to the appointment, no longer worrying that anything bad might happen. During the heart ultrasound, the examining doctor said, "There's something wrong." And I thought to myself, well, what might he have seen? What could it possibly be? And finally, he said he thought there was a tumor in the left atrium. At first, I was very shocked, and I still was lying there for a while he carried out further examinations. And finally, I asked him, "What's going to happen now?" And he replied, "Well, it has to be removed." For me, a world broke down. I had entered the hospital confidently, suspecting nothing bad. I wanted to know if this meant that my chest would have to be cut open, and he said, "Yes, that's right. It will be open heart surgery." I was deeply shocked and was just crying. When the examination was over and I wanted to get up in order to get dressed, the doctor said to me, "Oh no, you're going to have to stay here. We've already ordered an intensive care bed," and the bed was immediately there. So I was taken straight to the intensive care unit as an absolute emergency case for further examination. I thought their diagnosis was, in fact, mistaken because actually I didn't feel sick at all. But finally, the suspected tumor was confirmed. So I had to be transferred to another hospital where there was a special unit for cardiac diseases. Well, I was driven to this hospital on the highway with blue lights flashing, fully conscious, and with an emergency doctor by my side. I just couldn't believe it all. It felt like I was in a dream. It all did not feel real to me. It felt quite surreal. Since this day was a Friday, emergency surgery was initially scheduled for the next day, Saturday, but it was postponed, and I was to be operated on the following Monday because further examinations had to be carried out previously. Looking back, I have to say that I'm glad that everything happened so quickly and that I had absolutely no idea of how serious things were beforehand, because the after effects of the operation were pretty bad. So it was good that I had no idea of this before. In any case, the tumor was removed during the operation because there was indeed a very high risk that the tumor would come off with fatal consequences for me. At some point, I woke up and spent a day in intensive care and 2 days on the recovery ward. Then they said, "Your blood work, the laboratory values, that is, are good. So let's move her to the normal ward." Your near death experience was quite unusual because it lasted for several days, albeit with interruptions. Can you tell us about your experiences during this period of time? Well, due to all this noise, the harsh light, and of course, because of my total exhaustion, I hadn't sensed anything at all in this respect in the intensive care unit. It was only after I had been transferred to the normal ward and when finally lying in bed, where it was quiet and dark, that I was pulled out of my body into something like a room. But the word room is not the right term for it because a room has boundary, and there were no boundaries there. But in this case, please let me keep on using the term room. So it was a room that was not particularly bright and infinitely wide. And I saw myself in this room where suddenly, as if out of nowhere, figures were shooting toward me. Grimaces, monsters, really scary creatures. The one I remember most clearly was a worm-like, gigantic creature, and it was hairy. Ooh! And all these creatures were flying through me, and I could feel them doing so. I could feel them coming toward me, then flying through me. And this was so terrifying. And for me, it felt like it had gone on all day long. At some point, a friend of mine came to my bedside for a moment, and I regained consciousness, and I told her about what happened. I don't think I'll survive this. It's just awful, horrifying. So I told her about several things that had happened. The next day, for me, it felt like the next day, anyway, the room I had been pulled into changed. I was pulled out of my body over and over again. Maybe someone came into my room from time to time to check on me. Then, at that moment, I regained consciousness. But as soon as I was alone again, I was pulled away. At some point, the room I was pulled into consisted of incredible colors that became brighter and brighter. There were colors you can't imagine here on Earth. They were shimmering, full of energy. So while lying there in my hospital bed, I saw that the whole room was really completely full of beings. They were shining brightly in all the colors of the rainbow. And these beings, or souls, as I called them afterwards, or silhouettes, as only the contours could be seen, were somehow multi-dimensional. And you could also look into these figures or beings. I was able to look into the depths of each of these beings, of each individual soul. And the interesting thing was, and what I was just only admiring, is that all of these souls were interrelated with each other and were moving all together like a shoal of fish. But I initially perceived it all from an observer's perspective only. And fishes used to always move in the same way, once to the left, once to the right. And that's what these beings did. They all were somehow closely interrelated with each other, yet they were individuals. It was really incredible. And the whole room was filled with them. And suddenly, a gigantic pillar of light appeared in the corner on the other side of the room. And it was not limited by something like a ceiling, it was just huge, this pillar of light. It somehow came out of the ground and reached far up. Unbelievable. Yet these souls were suddenly striving to get into this light pillar with me somehow being pulled along. And at least from this point in time onwards, I realized that I now had a companion who used to constantly be on the right side in front of me, and he had a male energy. And I had the feeling that it was a man or a male being, let's put it that way. And he explained all sorts of things to me. And during all these episodes that would happen, it always seemed as if, like a computer, some software was being installed, that something was constantly being uploaded. So over and over again, I was supplied with packets of information. That, of course, I could not grasp immediately. And I eventually don't think I have even grasped it all properly to this day. It's really incredible, the wealth of information which was supposed to be transmitted there. Anyway, I was then drawn into this pillar of light, and suddenly we were, well, I would say, in outer space. At least that's how it seemed to be. Everything was deep, dark blue, and yet glistening bright. That's the only way I can describe it. It was just incredible, and everything was shimmering. And what was somehow clear is that everything, really everything, whatever it is, and that we can see, is closely interrelated with each other. Well, I'm a painter, and as to the colors, I was really impressed a lot by their absolute high frequency in a way that something like that simply doesn't exist in our dimension. Afterwards, I tried to work through all of this by means of a painting. But things like that can only be indicated somehow here in our three dimensionality. So, as a painter, I have to accept that these colors cannot be that faithfully reflected as I saw them. We then were flying through space at a very fast pace. As you may know from childhood dreams, and when looking down, I saw these souls or beings below us. I would like to finally call them souls. And these souls were standing there, reaching the horizon. Well, there wasn't really a horizon at all, but they were standing there as if they were waiting for something. And we were flying over them at breakneck speed. And some of these souls had glistening, brightly shining heads. As to all the inspirations I received, well, it was never that I heard a voice, but I just knew things immediately. So when I thought about something or asked about something, I received an answer immediately, simultaneously. Apparently, there were souls that were to fulfill certain tasks. And these were the ones with these shining heads so that they could be recognized. Unfortunately, I didn't ask any more details about this. So maybe I could have gone into it in more depth, but I was just totally flabbergasted and amazed. One piece of information I received was that there is nothing between the planets as we see it from our earthly perspective. Everything is full of life, everything is animated. Spaces that are believed to be empty, they do not exist. Maybe they only exist from our limited perspective on things, because we cannot perceive that much with our human bodies. But everything is full of life, and no one is alone. All space is filled with these beings or souls, although on other planes, this insight was really impressive. Every now and then I returned to my human consciousness. I was running a fever, and I suffered from cardiac arrhythmia, as well as from atrial fibrillation. I had water in my lungs, and I was firmly convinced that the physicians had taken me off the ventilators much too early. But I was unable to communicate this. I was not in a position to demand something like, please reconnect me to the ventilators. Furthermore, of course, I found what I was experiencing super exciting, especially as it became light and bright. But I think it was, of course, primarily this atrial fibrillation that got me into these situations. So, in retrospect, I would see it that way. Moreover, a puncture of my lungs should be done. But I thought, I just won't let anything else be done to my body that has been so maltreated. So I asked my spirit guides for help. I also knew a prana healer who did several remote treatments with me. And indeed, after 2 days, the water in my lungs was gone. So I would not have wanted such an intervention anymore. Well, then I was laying there, and it went on that way for days until the day I was discharged from hospital 8 days later. This means that I was transported back to the other hospital that had referred me, and where I had to be nursed further, followed by rehab, and so on. And whenever I was lying in bed, being conscious, I thought to myself, I wonder where they are now. Are they still here? And when I asked, are you still there? There were whistling noises coming from the opposite wall. It was really unbelievable. Then they came back, filling the room. Tell me, for how many days were you able to see these beings? After I had been transferred to my original hospital, I was only able to see these souls rarely, but I was always interrelated with them, and I am still up until this day. But as time went by, it only happened episodically that I perceived figures in the room, but not in the same way as before. Maybe this was due to the healing process, that I no longer could see them so clearly. But thank God, I still can disable the connection at any time. But before I start painting, I connect myself to these planes in order to somehow get these energies from these planes onto the canvas. And I often indeed succeed in doing so. But these visual perceptions were largely gone, although I still had some perceptions every now and then during the healing process. Afterwards, they became less and less. When going back to the first day when you perceived these horrible creatures, did you find an explanation for yourself as to why they were such monster like figures? Even before I had become ill, I was already dealing with spiritual issues, such as death and dying, and so on. I have always been interested in Buddhist topics, so I also read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, stating, for example, that the Tibetans say that you are first in an in between world for 49 days after your death, before you either go to nirvana or you are reborn, and it all also becomes evident from their belief whatsoever. And one of these episodes in this book says that during these 49 days, you will indeed be confronted with hellish beings or the like. You see? Well, for me, this was very interesting, and I read this book again later on. And these scriptures also state that after the hellish experience, you will go on to these realms of light. As for me, I don't know. At least these horrifying creatures weren't high vibrating beings, let's put it that way, as were the ones I encountered thereafter. I don't have any explanation for that. I just don't know. In any case, the first one was a terrible experience because physically I was completely aware of how these beings were passing through me. And this just simply felt for me like attacks on me and on my life, on my soul. But this cannot be easily understood, and I don't want to either. There may certainly be many interpretations for that. So I think that we are finally too ignorant about what is still existing around us. You have described being in space together with these beings. How did you get back into your body from there? One time, I somehow reached this universe directly out of the pillar of light, and this was one episode. And some events I don't remember. Maybe someone just entered the hospital room, whereupon I immediately found myself back in my body. I cannot say anything specific about that, nor about how I got out of the body again. Anyway, these millions and millions of souls reaching up to the horizon were very impressive. And as I said, they didn't move because compared to the preceding situation, when the pillar of light appeared, all the souls were moving. But now they just were standing there as if waiting for something, whatever, maybe to be admitted somewhere, or I just don't know, maybe to be reborn. That's beyond my knowledge. And it was not given to me as information either. What impact did this particular experience have on your life and on your worldview? As I said, I was already dealing with spiritual topics previously, and now I saw confirmation of what I always suspected, namely that there is something behind. First of all, We are much bigger than our bodies, and we have a very high potential. But in this earthly world, we are not told that we are actually very tall beings. But this is an insight that will have an everlasting impact on me. My perception as well has become much more acute. So today, I can perceive much more of a person I meet in terms of their present mood, their soul qualities, if I may say so, even if they should be very unfriendly toward me or might behave strangely. Often or mostly, I see the soul behind it and can then forgive the one or the other quite a bit. You see, everyone in this world would like to be happy in some way, and some people may have strange methods of achieving this happiness. Well, my perception as to this issue has been totally heightened. I also give workshops and so on, and actually, I can always read and assess people very well, even if I meet them for a short time only. And funnily enough, after my heart operation, my physical or energetic heart had opened up to such an extent that I can just simply love everyone. Furthermore, there was a complete change. What I mean is that I changed many of my habits after the operation because it was clear that I could not carry on as before. So I must have been doing something wrong in my life that made me think I had to change something. I then quit my job and had actually planned to open a healing practice together with a friend. But I did not do any of that because the information I was given by my friend was that I should stay a painter and just paint, and that my task here was actually documenting my experiences, and that is what I did. Furthermore, that I should continue dealing with spiritual issues and train myself in this respect, and that is also what I did. And eventually, let's say up to this day, I just think that I am so blessed and so happy to be allowed to have such a great trust in life and in things. Even though I have experienced enough crises during the last year, both personal and health related, and all sorts of things. And luckily, I indeed managed to get out of these dramas that you can get entangled in so quickly and go into trust by thinking to myself, well, Andrea, you've got another lesson to learn. Now, let's see what you can learn from it. And that way, I can accept it. And in view of what has happened over the past 2 or 3 years, all I can say is that I have total trust. For whatever comes to me is right, even if it doesn't feel right at that moment, it is still right. And this is, of course, a great blessing, you see. You had yet another exceptional experience later on. Would you tell me what happened? Yes, a very good friend of mine, whom I had known for at least 40 years, unfortunately had a bad diagnosis. She was diagnosed with cancer, lung cancer, and she asked me to accompany her, together with another friend who was a widow and had no one else that she had to look after. And this was a matter of course for us. Over a period of 1.5 years, she went through all the processes, such as chemotherapy and everything else that is usually done by conventional medicine. While we were accompanying and above all supporting her, we tried to always give her the confidence that things would continue somehow. Her biggest fear, of course, was suffocating, which I can understand because I saw her, of course. So suffocating is the biggest fear when suffering from lung cancer. And during the last 6 weeks of her illness, she was in the hospice, where we were talking about life and death. Although before she had not been completely convinced of it and hardly willing to entertain spiritual topics, but when she was in the hospice, she turned 180 degrees, and we were able to talk about a lot of things that she might have previously rejected or rather ridiculed. For example, I told her that she should not be frightened if any beings or people would be walking through her rooms in the near future. And that seems to me to be a normal process. She should not be afraid. Things like that I tried to convey to her. At some point, she told me that someone had been in the room, and so on. And then we agreed that when she is over there, she would give me a sign, any sign. So I said, if you make the light flicker, or if the light bulb goes out, I'll know it's you. Or do something else. Transmit any symbol for confirmation, if possible. I also told her that I get so many messages in my dreams, and maybe she will be able to appear in one of my dreams. We had another very deep exchange 1.5 to 2 weeks before she actually died, and even though she was sometimes still conscious for the last 2 days, I preferred to leave because I saw that she was so exhausted, whereas she still wanted to keep talking. So in the evening, I was at home, and in the night, I woke up. I used to lie on my right side with my arm stretched out to the side across the bed. So I woke up, and a very powerful energy was going through my body from top to bottom. And these were energies that I know from my near death experience. I had been sleeping before and I woke up because it was all so strong. It wasn't threatening, it rather was amazing. And I thought, what's going on here tonight? And this energy shot up and down through my energy field and through my body. A few days before, I had looked at my friend's hands because I found it interesting how the human body changes when in the dying process, and her hands were all blue veined and had already lost all substance. The connective tissue had already somehow collapsed, and her hand had remained in my memory. And now I was lying there while this energy was flowing through my body. And I don't know whether I had my eyes open or closed. I was probably in some kind of intermediate state, but I was conscious, and all I could see next to my bed was a kind of mist and something bright like a cloud. And I saw her hand coming out of this cloud. And there is no doubt that it was her hand. It was her. It was very clear that it was her. Then she put her hand on my hand that was stretched out as I have described already, saying, thank you so much, Andrea, for your friendship and your love. And she was saying this with a love that was incredible. And in this sense, I woke up. I was speechless. It all has deeply moved me. And I was so happy that it was possible to make such contact. However, this actually happened before my friend passed away. And after she had passed away, I had a dream where I was walking through a kind of corridor, similar to an underpass, with walls all around. And this corridor was very brightly lit. And still other people or soul beings were there. And we all were walking in the same direction. And suddenly, she came out of the wall on the left. She was very busy. She was very fashion conscious during her lifetime. So it was always very important for her to look particularly good. And she had a big handbag slung over her shoulder. And believe it or not, she was wearing a Chanel suit. And I still remember the pattern of this suit. And she appeared very busy. And that's what she was at this moment. She was turning toward me, then was looking at me without saying anything. But on the mental plane, I understood. Now you have seen me, and now it's all right. I'm busy here. I really don't have any more time. Thereupon, she crossed this corridor and was gone through the opposite wall, whereas I was still standing there, just saying, I've seen you. That's great. Thank you so much. Also, thanks a lot for appearing to me. I'm glad you're doing well. And it all happened when I was still in my dream. And this as well was absolutely real. The other friend kept asking me if I was dreaming anything about our mutual friend or something like that. And I just simply said yes. So she proposed that we try to contact her. I refused, saying that she gave me a very clear sign that she would like peace and quiet, just doing her own thing, wherever and whatever this may be, so we should leave her alone. And that's why I would not pursue this contact any further. If there are no further messages from her, then that's fine with me, and she has not contacted me since. Andrea, I want to thank you very much for the interview, and thank you so much, Franz.